disrupted.
America that I fought.
Weird thing to happen. Hello, one and all. Welcome to this edition of Kitz Corner. Hope you're having a fantastic day so far. I just want to show you, once again, just how horrible and how hypocritical your trusted leaders and the officials of the government and the oligarchy is when it comes to fundamental values and when it comes to the general society as a whole. You know, they value that freedom of speech is important. They value the idea of free press while prosecuting mostly journalists, while in bed with neo-Nazis, while in bed with the most nefarious people around that are solely in presence to oppress individuals and oppress people at the largest scale and full of mass murderers. They are no way in help of the general good of society. And here's just another example of this when President Biden made an address here about journalists and the importance of protecting journalists, primarily two that were detained in Russia who were working at the Wall Street Journal. And this is what he said in his speech here.
As a consequence of Austin showing the world the cost of war, he's been detained in Syria for nearly 11 years. It's simply wrong, it's outrageous, and we are not ceasing our effort to get him, find him, bring him home. Tonight, our message is this: journalism is not a crime. Evan and Austin should be released immediately, along with every other American held hostage or wrongfully detained abroad.
So he made that proclamation that journalism is not a crime, and the people that are held hostage should be released. Because being a journalist, being a reporter, and telling people information should not be a substantial crime to be arrested for. And I agree with that. I agree with that statement. A whole 100%. I don't think there's anyone out there that would not disagree with what he just said there. But actions speak louder than words. And what his words are saying does not comply with what the actions of his response and his administration is doing. Because as Claire Daly points out, I have to agree with Joe Biden. Journalism is not a crime. So why is his administration attempting, by continuing Trump's menacing espionage prosecution of Julian Assange, to criminalize journalism everywhere in the world that exposes U.S. wrongdoing? Make it make sense. So that is the big hypocrisy of all this, and that is why this is nothing more than gaslighting you and a slap in the face of protecting journalism and the ideals, the fundamental ethics of what it means to be a journalist. They could not care less. They could not care less. The reason that they want to free these people is because they are more stenographers. They are propagandists that will promote their agenda. So they're going to take those people. But the people that are actually sticking their heads out to hold the oligarchy accountable for all the for the wrongdoings, for the war crimes that they commit, the crimes against humanity, they would rather have them dead. And that's what's happening here. That's what's happening here. So Joe Biden saying that journalism is not a crime is just mealy-mouthed words that he's saying. He's gaslighting you because his actions are saying that he could not care less about journalism. And just to remind people, Julian Assange could be weeks away from extradition to the United States over WikiLeaks. Weeks away. And he didn't mention to bother any of this. None of this is mentioned on mainstream media. None of this. One of the biggest criminal cases involving Julian Assange, who keeps reminding us every single day about the importance of fact-finding evidence to showcase the world the information of the war crimes that are being committed, the mass murders, looking inside the oligarchy, that your friends, your family, your neighbors are not the real enemy. It's the people that are telling you who your enemies are. It's just weeks away from the United States doing the most inhumane situation against an individual. And this is even bigger than Julian Assange. This is about journalism. This is about freedom of speech. If they're going to prosecute Julian Assange for being a publisher, for the words that he's saying, for the information that he's providing you, that puts a target on every single individual's back. That is why this is such a big deal. But nobody has bothered to mention about this. No one. Supporters of Julian Assange rally at Justice Department on 4-year anniversary of detainment. So this has been going on for years. I just want to show people that this is not nothing new. This is not just suddenly happened. That Julian Assange has been detained under espionage charges by the United States, by the UK, by the Australian government, by all the oligarchies out there, and the globalist system that has caused unspeakable war crimes against humanity, want this person to be wiped off the face of the earth. And that is a threat to journalism. That is a threat to freedom of speech. And this has been going on for years under the dark, that they're trying to hide this away from the mainstream media. And here's also this. While Biden is promoting that, Evan and the other person of the Wall Street Journal should be taken back to the United States for working for the Wall Street Journal, here's another American journalist that's been detained by Ukraine. So they're screaming and pointing the finger at Russia for detaining American journalists of the Wall Street Journal, but they're not wagging the finger at Ukraine for capturing American journalists that's been reporting, that's been on the grounds, that's put their boots on the grounds of the war zone, and has reported accurately and critically about the war in Ukraine. And it says detaining Gonzalo Lira, another blow to freedom of press in Ukraine. So we already know that Ukraine has silenced all of its opposition. They have done a mass censorship campaign. They have been tyrannical when it came to opposing voices, opposing views. They have dictated everybody from language to religion to everything. Every aspect has been under this reign. And a journalist from America who's been reporting on this is being detained by the Ukrainian government, by the reign of Zelensky. And nowhere in the mainstream media here in the United States, in the U.S. or here in Canada, none of this is being mentioned about this. None of it. So it says, Ukrainian Security Service, the SBU, arrested Gonzalo Lira, a U.S. Chilean national residing in Kharkiv, on suspicions of harboring pro-Russian sentiments. That's what they're claiming this on. That he's basing his journalism against the Ukraine official narrative. They're doing this on a bias. They're arresting him for being a so-called conspiracy nut, pro-Russian conspiracy nut. This marks the second time Lira has been apprehended by the SBU. Lira, an author and filmmaker who relocated to Kharkiv years ago and married a Ukrainian, was initially detained in April 2022, but was released after a week without charges. He was subsequently instructed not to leave the city and prohibited to discussing his arrest. So, it is just unbelievably amazing that the United States, Canada, European nations, so have you, and their leaders can talk extensively about how Russia detains its journalists and how Russia can do unspeakable things to its own citizens and everything, and they're unruly and they're such a dictatorship. But when there's other nations that are doing the exact same thing that they're screaming their heads at Russia about, complete silence. They're angry at Russia for detaining Wall Street journalists, but here's a guy who is a documentarian with boots on the ground of the war zone and completely being silent about it. And they're just allowing this to happen. They're not having negotiations. There's no notification on this. None of it. And then this got into the State Department. And it says from Liam Cosgrove, State Department refuses to say whether it will negotiate with Zelensky for release of detained U.S. citizen Gonzalo Lira. So this was mentioned. This was mentioned by a journalist to the State Department that, hey, you have an American journalist detained in another country. Biden just made an address that journalism is not a crime, and we'll do everything that we can to rescue these American citizens for the crime of reporting. And here's what they had to say about this.
Thanks, Leo Cosgrove with Epic Times. So this was a couple weeks ago, but I haven't seen an official statement on it. A U.S. citizen who was residing in Ukraine has been arrested, and that he was a California-born man. He was in the past like a Business Insider contributor, and he had a YouTube channel. He was an outspoken critic of Zelensky's regime. The Ukrainian SBU released a press release saying he was arrested for justifying Putin's invasion. So ultimately, it added up to speech. And I spoke with Congressman Ted Lieu, Democrat, and he said he urges the State Department to engage its authorities to, work out some sort of negotiation to get him released. So are you guys aware of this? How do we feel about our allies, detaining U.S. citizens for speech abroad?
I will say in general that we're aware of the report. We obviously support the exercise of freedom of speech anywhere in the world, and I'll leave it at that.
So you guys aren't working to get him released?
That's it.
I'm going to leave my comments where I just left them. Kylie.
That's their entire response. You have an American journalist detained in Ukraine, being jailed and prosecuted for freedom of speech. And your response is, well, obviously we care about freedom of speech, but there's nothing we can do at this point, so carry on. Next. Again, actions speak louder than words. And this is why I could not care less about what they say to a person than what the actual response is. Joe Biden can say all he wants about how journalism is not a crime and we respect the values that our forefathers fought for, the freedom of speech, the freedom of the press, the freedom of assembly. If you are not acting on what you are saying, then it is completely meaningless. Absolutely meaningless. Which is exactly the point. It's all gaslighting. They could not care at all about freedom of individuals. They could not care less about the freedom of the press. They could not care less about the ethics of journalism. They rather see these journalists get detained more and more often to hide away their criminality so they won't be in the spotlight because they don't want to be held accountable. That's why they're continuing prosecuting Julian Assange. That's why they tortured Chelsea Manning. That's why Edward Snowden had to be exiled to Moscow. That's why Tara Reid had to be exiled to Moscow because they were prosecuting her for speaking up against the Biden family. They don't want ethical journalists. They don't want people that can actually tell the truth. They want stenographers. They want people that can comply with the status quo. That's why they're so entrenched with trying to rescue Evan, Wall Street journalist, from Russia detainment and get him back to the country so he can continue bring you polarizing propaganda, but not actually have a fact-based journalist that's providing you context. So just the hypocrisy, you just cut with a steak knife. It's just so right in front of your face. And even Tucker Carlson made some points about this on a recent episode of his Twitter show, and constantly just reminding us that the reason that these wars on democracy, on trying to fight for democracy, sounds ridiculous is because it is ridiculous. The war for democracy is actually against democracy as time and time goes on. We did it with Afghanistan, it failed. We tried doing it with Libya, it failed. We did with every single country, which is why anytime someone mentions that these wars are for humanity, this war is for democracy, this war is for the good people of the select region, is complete BS. It is not for the good of humanity. It is not anything for those people. It is to capitalize the destruction and tyranny of an oppressed society that we continue to demonize and then hijack their resources and take over and dominate over those territories. That's what it's about. So here's Tucker Carlson saying this.
Wars for democracy always cancel democracy in the process. That's why our leaders love them. And they all do it, even the virtuous leaders. Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus. The British government under Winston Churchill threw an entire opposition party into prison and let them rot for the duration, in some cases with their families. So in a war for democracy, you can do anything. Imagine what a man might do who has fewer principles. If that man, say, ran Ukraine, he might seize churches, arrest priests, ban all criticism of himself, disappear his political opponents. And that's happening. Just last month, Zelensky threw a man called Gonzalo Lira into prison indefinitely for the crime of daring to write about the Ukrainian government in unflattering ways. Now, what's interesting, what separates this from other such cases, is that Lira is an American citizen. So Joe Biden, who is quite a bit of SWAT, as they say in Ukraine, could have freed Gonzalo Lira within hours. But he didn't.
Could have.
He didn't want to. He didn't say a word about it. He remains in prison tonight. So that makes you wonder, what's the real motive here? When normal people see war, they see death and destruction, sadness and suffering. But that's not what demagogues see. They understand it differently. They know that war means power, mostly for them. During wartime, everything they do can be justified. War is the gravest of all emergencies. Imagine the COVID lockdowns times 1,000 plus drones. Once war breaks out, politicians become gods with the power of life and death. So in a peaceful democracy, you have to debate your political opponents in public, and that's tiresome. But in a war for democracy, you can just throw them in jail or have them executed. You can see that many in Washington are looking forward to that moment.
So there you go. The speech you heard Joe Biden say that journalism is not a crime, it was gaslighting you for that obvious reason. That we don't actually care about this because Joe Biden is a demagogue seeking power. Zelensky is a demagogue seeking power. And he wants authority over the narrative. He wants authority over the information. Same with Joe Biden, same with Justin Trudeau, same with any other globalized leader that is so power hungry that they want to dominate over culture and context and information, because then that dominates over you. That dominates over what people say, what people think, their mindset, their attitudes, everything. This is deeply a complete obliteration of humanity, because one of the greatest principles, one of the greatest founding resources, and one of the most humane values we can have as people, not just of this country or your country or any other country, but just as human beings, is the ability to express freely our ideas and opinions. And being able to have freedom of press, being able to have freedom of speech, being able to grow and evolve from conversations. That's one of the greatest values of being a human being. And we have tyrannical leaders left, right, and center that are taking over it because they want dominant control. As Tucker Carlson said, the war for democracy is a scam. It's a gaslight scam. It's a proxy war for power, lucrative power away from people. Ironically, the people that didn't want the war in the first place, did not want war, did not want Russia to invade into Ukraine, did not want Ukraine to do a proxy against Russia, does not want NATO in part of their lives. None of it. These people just want to live normal, healthy lives in their lifestyle. And they're being confiscated into this regime, confiscated into this oligarchy, this oppressive regime that's doing unspeakable things to people. So here's a final note here.
Always cancel democracy.
Here's a final note here from Brian Berletic. And he says, U.S. Chilean citizen Gonzalo Lira is still jailed by the government of Ukraine solely for stating facts. Even Kiev's U.S. backers have admitted to. So even American journalists know that this guy is not a liar. People know that he's not a liar. And that's the thing. You're not going to be jailed for misinforming people. You're not going to go to jail for deliberately lying to the American public. You're not going to be going to jail for duping an entire population. However, you're going to be jailed. You're going to be silenced out. You're going to get targeted if you tell the truth, if you inform people about the nefarious stuff that your government is doing. Those are the people that suffer the most. The U.S. government is aware of this and is complicit in their deliberate silence. Western values. All that freedom of speech, you could say all you want. These elected leaders, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and any individual could say all they want about, freedom of speech, but if you don't have the principle to protect even people you disagree with, even people you hate the most, if you don't have the principle and stance to fight for those people, then you really don't have values. You really don't have the value of freedom of speech. You really don't hold that dear. And what you're just doing is twisting your logic around, twisting this around to favor you, which is, it's not a principle then. It's just you having a hobby. Which I think is something else that Tucker Carlson mentioned, that if you don't fight for values, if you don't fight for principles, then those aren't values, those aren't principles. You're just picking and choosing a side. You're just being a cult follower, which is what a lot of people are. Because they can scream all they want about the Wall Street journalist being detained in Russia, but if they don't scream for this, if they don't scream for Julian Assange, if they don't scream for Chelsea Manning, if they don't scream for, Alex Jones being kicked off the internet, but they're screaming for another journalist that they're screaming for Jim Acosta when Trump is shushing him, then you're not for the principle of free speech. You're not for the principle of protecting basic rights. You're just having hobbies. You're just picking and choosing your own people because of your cult-like mindset.